A tornado wiped out my home. With nowhere else to go, I ran to my son's place. He braced himself in the doorway while his fiancée shrieked, "We don't want you here. Let the government deal with homeless people." That night, I slept on a bench at the train station. At dawn, I noticed a deaf boy stepping toward the edge of the platform, ready to throw himself onto the tracks. I was the only one who understood his frantic signing, and the only one who could stop him. His billionaire father watched everything unfold. What he did afterward changed my life completely. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end of my story, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from so I can see how far my words travel. My name is Marianne, and at 64, I thought I already knew what it meant to lose things. I was wrong. The tornado struck Millfield on a Tuesday evening in March. I was in the kitchen cooking dinner for one, just like I'd been doing for the last 8 years since my husband Harold died, when the sirens suddenly started to howl. The noise sliced through the quiet of my little house like a blade. I'd lived through plenty of storms, but this one felt different. The air itself seemed charged with something cruel. I grabbed my emergency bag and shuffled toward the basement, each step down the wooden stairs making my arthritic knees ache. Above me, the house groaned, its beams straining against winds I still couldn't see. I crouched in the corner where Harold had once built a small shelter, clutching a framed photo of our son Paul at his college graduation. My only child, my greatest pride, smiling in cap and gown. There's no way to truly describe the sound that followed. It wasn't just wind, it was as if the world itself was roaring. The house shook violently. I heard things smashing overhead, glass breaking, timber snapping, my life being torn apart piece by piece. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered prayers I hadn't uttered since Harold's funeral. When the storm finally stopped, the silence felt even more terrifying. I stayed in that basement for what seemed like hours, too scared to see what might be left. When I finally forced myself up the stairs, my legs trembled for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. What used to be my kitchen was almost unrecognizable. The roof had vanished. The north-facing walls had collapsed inward. My refrigerator lay in what used to be the living room, pinned beneath a huge oak tree that had stood in my yard longer than I'd been alive. Rain poured through the ragged opening where my ceiling had been, soaking family photos scattered across the wreckage. I stood in the ruins of my home, water dripping onto my shoulders, trying to comprehend the reality in front of me. 64 years of life, 36 spent in that house, gone in a single evening. The quilt my mother made as a wedding gift, the china Harold surprised me with on our 10th anniversary, the rocking chair where I nursed Paul as a baby, destroyed or buried under debris. All around me, my neighbors were facing the same nightmare. Mrs. Patterson from next door stared blankly at what was left of her garage. The Hendersons' place was simply gone, just a concrete foundation where their home used to be. Emergency vehicles began to arrive, red and blue lights throwing harsh flashes across the devastation. A young Red Cross volunteer with gentle eyes and a clipboard walked up to me as I stood frozen in the doorway of what was left. "Ma'am, do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Any family nearby?" Family. Paul. Of course, Paul. My son lived just 2 hours away in the city with his fiancée Salem. He was a successful accountant, owned a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. Surely my own son would help me. That's what families do, I told myself. "Yes," I answered, hearing how strange my own voice sounded. "My son. I can stay with my son?" I picked through the wreckage and managed to rescue a few things. Some clothes that weren't completely ruined, my purse, Paul's photo, and a small jewelry box that had belonged to my grandmother. Everything fit into 2 trash bags. 2 bags for an entire lifetime. How could that be possible? The drive to Paul's house felt unreal. The tornado had carved a brutal wound through Millfield, but just 20 miles south, everything looked perfectly normal. The sunset painted the sky in soft pinks and oranges. People were getting off work, heading home to intact houses and ordinary evenings. Paul's home was in a development called Willowbrook Estates. The properties were all big and new with identical manicured lawns and 2-car garages. His place was a pale blue colonial with white trim. Salem's BMW was parked in the driveway beside Paul's Honda. They were obviously home. I rang the doorbell with shaking fingers, still dressed in the same clothes I'd worn that morning, now stained with dust and ripped from climbing through broken boards. The door swung open, and Salem stood there, not Paul. She was 28, 12 years younger than my son, with salon-perfect blonde hair and makeup that somehow never seemed to smear. She wore white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in an entire month. When she saw me standing there clutching my trash bags, her sculpted eyebrows pulled together in an expression I first mistook for worry. "Marianne, what are you doing here?" "Salem, sweetheart, there was a tornado. My house is gone. Everything is gone. I need Paul," I said, my voice shaking. "Paul, your mother's here," she called over her shoulder, never taking her eyes off me. I heard his footsteps coming down the hall before I saw him. My son appeared behind her, still wearing his work shirt and tie, though the knot was loosened. For a split second, I thought I saw relief on his face, relief that I was alive. But then Salem rested her hand on his arm, and his expression hardened. "Mom, what happened? You look awful," he said. "The tornado hit Millfield," I explained. "The house is completely destroyed, Paul. I've lost everything." My voice broke. "I just need a place to stay for a little while until I figure out what to do. The insurance adjuster won't even come until next week at the earliest." Paul glanced at Salem, and she looked back at him. In that brief exchange, my heart began to fracture in a way no storm could ever cause. "Mom, this really isn't a good time," Paul said carefully. "Salem's parents are flying in tomorrow for our engagement party. We've got guests coming, caterers. It's going to be hectic." "I won't be any trouble," I blurted out. "I can sleep on the couch. I'll stay out of the way, I promise. I won't even—" "Absolutely not," Salem cut in, her voice suddenly cold and sharp. "We can't have you showing up like that when my parents arrive. They don't know about your situation." "My situation?" I stared at her, trying to make sense of what she meant. "You know," she said, flicking her hand in the air dismissively. "Living alone in that little house, working at a grocery store until you retired. My parents are very successful people, Marianne. My father owns 3 car dealerships. They have certain expectations." Paul rested his hand on Salem's shoulder in what was meant to look supportive, but to me it felt like a line being drawn. "What Salem means," he said carefully, "is that we've painted a certain picture of our families. Her parents think you live comfortably, maybe in a nice retirement community." "So you're embarrassed by me," I said. The words didn't even sound angry, just hollow. "It's not about embarrassment," Paul replied, but he still wouldn't look me in the eye. "It's about timing. Look, I can give you some money for a hotel. There's a nice Holiday Inn about 10 minutes away. You can stay there while you figure things out." Money for a hotel. I stood on my own son's porch, holding my entire life stuffed into 2 trash bags, and he was offering to pay for me to be anywhere but inside his home, anywhere but on his couch. "How long have you been planning this engagement party?" I asked quietly. Paul shifted his weight like the question made him uncomfortable. "About 2 months. We sent the invitations 3 weeks ago." "And you didn't invite me?" I asked. Salem actually laughed. It sounded sharp and brittle, like glass cracking. "Marianne, be realistic," she said. "This is a sophisticated event. Cocktails, canapes, important people from Paul's firm. It's not really your kind of thing." "Not my kind of thing." My son was about to celebrate his engagement, and somehow his own mother no longer fit the picture. I looked at Paul, really looked at him, and tried to see the little boy who used to crawl into my bed when storms scared him, who cried over a dead goldfish, who once told me I was the best mom in the world because I baked him cookies after school. But the man in front of me wasn't that child anymore. He was a stranger in an expensive shirt standing beside a woman who treated me like a problem to be managed. "So you're choosing her," I said simply. "Mom, don't be dramatic," he replied. "I'm not choosing anyone. I'm just being practical. You'll be more comfortable at the hotel anyway. They've got room service, cable. You'll be better off there than here." He didn't deny what I'd said. The absence of that denial told me everything. Salem stepped in closer to Paul, as if to stake her claim. "We're building a life here, Marianne," she said. "Paul has worked really hard to get where he is. We can't afford any complications." Complications, that's what I had become to them. Not a mother, not family, just a complication. I bent down and picked up my trash bags again, my arms aching under the weight of what little I had left. "I understand," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'll go to the hotel." Paul's expression turned into a strange blend of relief and guilt, which, in some ways, hurt even more. "I'll call you tomorrow, okay?" he said. "We'll figure out your next steps." But I knew, in my heart, that those next steps wouldn't involve him. Not really. As I walked back to my car, I heard Salem's voice through the door they'd already closed. "Thank God that's over. Can you imagine if my parents had seen her like that?" I sat in the car in their driveway for several minutes, staring at the house where my son lived his life without me. The engagement party I wasn't invited to. The future in which I had no place. The family that no longer seemed to include me. The Holiday Inn room cost $129 a night. I had $347 in my checking account and no idea when I'd see another deposit. The insurance would eventually pay for repairs or rebuilding, but that could take months, maybe longer. The front desk clerk at the hotel, a tired woman around my age, must have seen the panic in my eyes. She offered to give me the room for one night at the weekly rate if I paid in cash. I accepted, grateful for even that small kindness. The room was clean but soulless. Beige walls, brown furniture, generic artwork that meant nothing to anyone. I set my 2 trash bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed in my torn, smoke and dust-stained clothes. For the first time since the tornado hit, I let myself fully break. I cried for my house, my possessions, the photo albums I'd never flip through again. But underneath all of that, deeper and sharper, I cried for the realization that I had raised a son who saw his own mother as an embarrassment. Somewhere along the line, I had failed so completely that my child preferred to pay for my disappearance instead of offering me a spot on his couch in my worst moment. That night, lying on an unfamiliar bed in clothes that smelled of ruin, I made a decision. I would leave in the morning, but I wouldn't drive back to Paul's house. I wouldn't call him again. I had spent 35 years being his mother. If that wasn't enough to earn me a blanket and a corner of his sofa when I had nowhere else to go, then nothing ever would be. I would figure this out on my own, the way I'd managed everything since Harold died, the way apparently I'd been on my own long before I realized it. But first, I had to get through the next day, and I had no idea how I was supposed to do that. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Salem's laugh and saw the look on Paul's face when he chose comfort and appearances over me. By 5 a.m, I gave up on sleep altogether. I sat by the window and watched the sun rise over a world that no longer felt like mine. The complimentary breakfast downstairs was weak coffee and stale pastries, but it was free, so I forced myself to eat. Around me, people in business clothes checked their phones, discussing meetings, flights, dinner reservations, ordinary problems belonging to people whose lives were still intact. At 11, I checked out. I couldn't afford another night. I also had nowhere to go. The desk clerk, the same woman from the night before, gave me a soft, sympathetic look and suggested I try the Salvation Army shelter on 5th Street. "They're good people," she said gently. "They'll help you get back on your feet." A shelter. At 64 years old, I was being pointed toward a homeless shelter. I couldn't face that yet. I got in my car and just drove. I didn't have a destination, only distance to put between myself and the hotel, and the house where my son had turned me away. The city pulsed with the usual weekday energy. Cars honked, people hurried down sidewalks in work shoes, sipping coffee, juggling briefcases and backpacks. Their lives were still moving forward while mine felt like it had slammed into a wall. Eventually, without really deciding to, I ended up near the downtown train station, a big brick building from the 1920s. Part of it had been converted into little shops and cafes, but it still served as a hub for commuter trains. The parking lot was free, and there were plenty of benches outside where I could sit and think, try to figure out what to do next. The morning was slowly warming up, spring gently nudging winter out of the way. People moved in and out of the station with purpose, with schedules, with places to be, so sure of their paths in a way I desperately envied. I chose a bench near the platform. My 2 garbage bags sat at my feet like anchors, chaining me to a reality I didn't want to acknowledge. Trains kept arriving and departing, carrying people into the city for work and back out again to suburbs where they had houses, routines, and families who were happy to see them. That's when I noticed him. He looked about 9 or 10, small for his age, with dark hair that needed a trim and clothes that were clearly expensive but wrinkled, like he'd slept in them. He was perched right on the edge of the platform, his legs dangling over the side, far too close to the tracks. There were signs everywhere warning passengers to stand behind the yellow line, but this child was sitting right at the brink. Something about his posture set off alarm bells in my mind. He wasn't swinging his legs or glancing around like most children would. He was perfectly still, unnaturally still, staring down at the tracks below. People walked past him without a second glance, absorbed in their phones, their thoughts, their timetables. No one seemed to see him. I found myself standing up and moving closer, almost before I realized I'd made the decision. Maybe I was searching for something to pull my mind away from my own problems. Maybe it was instinct, the part of me that would always be a mother, no matter what Paul had done. Whatever it was, I knew one thing. That boy needed someone to notice him. As I moved closer, I got a better look at his face. His eyes were large and dark, far too serious for a child, and there was a kind of aching loneliness in the way he sat there that tightened my chest. He wore a navy polo with a small logo I didn't recognize and pressed khaki pants that looked like something from an upscale children's boutique. I approached slowly, the way you might approach a skittish animal you don't want to scare off. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "you're sitting awfully close to the edge. Maybe you should scoot back a little." He didn't react, didn't look at me. For a second I thought he was just ignoring me, but then I noticed the small hearing aids in both of his ears. I stepped into his line of sight and gave a small wave to get his attention. When he finally lifted his gaze, the sorrow in his eyes almost knocked the breath right out of me. I'd seen that same emptiness in my own reflection after Harold died. It was the expression of someone who'd stopped expecting things to get better. Before I could second-guess myself, my hands were already moving. "Hello," I signed. "Are you okay?" The motions came back to me automatically, muscle memory from all the years I'd spent talking with my sister Janet before she passed away. The boy's eyes widened in shock. Then his hands flew up, fingers trembling as he signed back. "You know sign language?" "Yes," I signed. My sister was deaf. "What's your name?" "Connor," he replied, his hands a little unsteady. "Why are you talking to me? Most people don't notice me." My heart cracked just a bit more. "I notice you," I signed. "Why are you sitting so close to the tracks, Connor? It's dangerous." His face crumpled, and suddenly he wasn't a still, silent figure on the edge of the platform. He was just a hurting little boy. "I wanted to see what it would feel like," he signed. "If a train came." The blood in my veins turned to ice. This child, this beautiful, precious boy, was thinking about ending his life. "Connor, no," I signed quickly. "Whatever's wrong, there is always another way." "No, there isn't," he replied, tears spilling down his cheeks. "My dad doesn't understand me. Nobody understands me. I'm different, and I just make everything harder for everyone." I lowered myself onto the platform beside him, not so close as to crowd him, but close enough that I could reach him if he tried to move toward the edge again. "Being different doesn't make you a burden," I signed slowly. "It makes you special. Tell me about your dad." "He tries," Connor signed, dragging his sleeve across his nose. "But he doesn't know sign language. He talks to me, but he moves his mouth really slowly like I'm stupid, and I have to guess what he's saying. When I try to tell him things, he gets frustrated because he doesn't understand. The situation was starting to come into focus. Hearing father, deaf son, a giant wall of miscommunication between them, both probably feeling alone on opposite sides of it. "Where is your dad now?" I signed. He had to take an important phone call. Connor signed, his movements slowing with emotional exhaustion. "He told me to wait here. He's always on the phone. Work is more important than me." I knew that feeling far too well. The ache of being overlooked, of feeling like an afterthought to the very people who are supposed to love you most. Connor was living out his own version of what had happened to me the night before. "Connor, I want you to pay very close attention," I signed, making sure his eyes stayed on my hands. "You matter. You are important. The fact that your dad doesn't know sign language doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It just means he needs help learning how to show it." "You really think so?" he signed, a tiny spark of hope flickering in his gaze. "I know so," I answered. "And right now, I need you to move back from the edge with me. Can you do that?" He nodded and shuffled backward, away from the drop. As he did, I heard hurried footsteps and a man shouting, "Connor, Connor, where are you?" A tall man in an expensive suit rushed into view, his expression a mix of terror and anger. He looked to be in his early 40s. His hair was dark like Connor's, threaded with gray at the temples, and he had the same deep brown eyes. When he spotted Connor on the platform, relief washed over his face. "There you are," he said sharply. "I told you to stay by the information desk, not wander off to the platform." His tone was edged with fear and exasperation. He was speaking, not signing, and I could see Connor struggling to read his lips, his eyes darting from mouth to eyes and back again. Connor's hands flew up as he tried to sign an explanation, but his father didn't understand. The frustration on both their faces was painful to watch. Two people trying to reach each other but trapped in different worlds. "Excuse me," I said, getting to my feet and stepping slightly between them. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The man finally seemed to register that I was there. He looked me over properly this time, taking in my rumpled clothes, the trash bags full of my possessions, the tired, hollow look I probably had. "I'm sorry," he said, his tone softening. "Were you speaking with my son?" "I'm Derek Morrison." "Yes," I replied. "I'm Marianne. Connor and I were having a conversation about staying safe near the trains." I gestured toward the boy who was watching us anxiously. "He's a very smart child." "A conversation?" Derek repeated, clearly puzzled. "But Connor can't usually do that," Derek said, frowning. "He has trouble communicating with strangers." "We were using sign language," I explained. "Connor was telling me how hard it is when people don't understand him." Derek's face went paper white. "You know sign language? And he was talking to you?" "Yes," I said. "He's very expressive when someone can actually understand him." Derek turned to his son, and I saw something shift, crack open, in his expression. "What was he saying?" I hesitated and glanced at Connor. He gave me a small nod, granting permission. "He told me he feels lonely," I said gently, "that he wishes you could understand each other better." Derek's eyes filled almost instantly. "Connor," he said, speaking slowly and deliberately, facing him so Connor could read his lips. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know you felt that way." Connor signed back in a rush, his fingers flying. Derek looked at me helplessly. "He says he knows you love him," I translated, "but he wishes you could talk the way he and I are talking now. He wants to tell you things, but he doesn't know how to make you understand." Derek dropped to his knees in front of his son, tears running freely now. "Connor," he said, voice breaking, "I promise you, I'm going to learn. I'm going to learn how to really talk with you. Will you help me?" Connor flung his arms around his father's neck, clinging to him. They stayed like that on the platform while commuters stepped around them, giving the little family their own small island of space. Watching them, seeing this fragile bridge finally begin to form between them, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A sense that I mattered, that my being there had made a real difference. Derek stood up, keeping one hand resting protectively on Connor's shoulder, and turned to me. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. I had no idea he felt that shut out. We've been trying to cope since his mother died 2 years ago, and I thought I was managing. But clearly, "You're doing the best you can," I said softly. Being a single parent is hard enough without having to fight through a communication barrier on top of it. "Are you a teacher? A therapist?" Derek asked. "You seem to understand him so well." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "No," I said. "I'm just someone who learned sign language for my sister, and someone who knows what it feels like to be misunderstood by the people who should know you best." He studied my face then, really studied it, as if seeing past the rumpled clothes and trash bags to the person underneath. "Are you all right?" he asked. "You look like you're going through something pretty heavy yourself." For a moment, the old reflex kicked in, the urge to paste on a smile and say, "I'm fine, really." But after what had just happened, after stopping his son from stepping off that edge, pretending felt pointless. "I lost my home in the tornado yesterday," I said plainly, "and I found out my family doesn't want me around while I figure out what comes next." Derek's expression shifted instantly, filling with shock and compassion. "You're homeless," he said slowly, "and you still took the time to help my son when you're in the middle of your own crisis?" "Sometimes helping someone else is the only way to help yourself," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was completely true. Connor was tugging on his father's sleeve, signing with growing frustration at being left out. "He wants to know what we're talking about," I told Derek. Derek looked from Connor to me. "Could you tell him," he asked, "that the lady who helped him is going through something very hard, and ask if he thinks we should help her the way she helped us?" I turned to Connor and signed Derek's words. His face brightened immediately and his hands flew. "He says, 'Of course we should help you,'" I translated, my throat tightening. "He says that's what families do. They help each other. And he wants to know if you could be part of your family for a while." Derek looked stunned, then almost humbled. I gave a watery smile. "Children usually see more clearly than adults," I said, my voice thick. Derek was quiet for a long beat, looking between Connor and me as if weighing something enormous. "I have a big house," he said at last. "Too big for just the two of us. There are several guest rooms, and Connor clearly needs someone who can really communicate with him while I learn. Would you consider staying with us for a while? Just until you get back on your feet?" I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you saw a child in danger and stayed instead of walking away. I know you took the time to understand him even though your own life is falling apart. And I know my son feels more connected to you in 10 minutes than he has to anyone since his mother died." His voice grew steadier, more certain as he continued. "And I know I need help becoming the father he deserves." Connor was signing again, his face bright, hands moving with excited energy. "What's he saying?" Derek asked. I watched Connor's hands and felt tears sting my eyes. "He says maybe the tornado didn't just take things from you," I said. "Maybe it brought you something too. Someone who understands him, and someone who needed a family." Derek wiped his eyes, looking at his son with such stunned love that it almost hurt to watch. "Out of the mouths of babes," he murmured. Then he turned back to me. "What do you say, Marianne? Will you help us learn how to be a family again?" I looked at them, this father and son both carrying their own wounds, both offering me something I thought I'd lost forever, a place where I mattered, where I was needed not for my money or my usefulness, but for who I was and what I could give of myself. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'd like that very much." We left the station together, Derek carrying one of my trash bags, Connor gripping my hand and talking a mile a minute in sign language about all the things he wanted to show me. As we walked away from the tracks, I realized that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you truly need. Behind us, a train pulled into the station, its whistle echoing against the old brick walls. But we were moving toward something entirely different. Hope. Derek's house was nothing like I'd imagined. When he'd said, "large house with guest rooms," I'd pictured something like a bigger version of Paul's place. a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in a nice neighborhood. Instead, when we passed through the iron gates, I found myself staring at a mansion straight out of a magazine spread. The driveway wound past meticulously landscaped lawns and sculpted hedges that probably cost more to maintain each month than I'd earned in a year at the grocery store. The house itself was a grand Georgian-style estate, red brick, white columns, and long wings stretching out in both directions. In the back seat, Connor pressed his face to the window, signing excitedly about his room, the library, and the pool he couldn't wait to show me. "This is beautiful," I said quietly, trying not to sound as overwhelmed as I felt. In the rearview mirror, Derek glanced at me. "It's too big for just the two of us," he said. "Sometimes Connor literally gets lost in it." "I think that's part of why he feels so alone," Derek said quietly. As we pulled up to the front entrance, I noticed how impeccable everything looked. Perfect hedges, trimmed grass, immaculate flower beds. It was beautiful, but in a sterile, impersonal way. It reminded me more of a luxury hotel than a home where a child actually lived. There were no toys in the yard, no bikes tipped over on the driveway, no chalk drawings on the walkway, none of the cheerful mess that usually comes with a kid. Derek must have caught my expression. "Connor's nanny quit 3 months ago," he explained. "She said it was too hard to communicate with him. Since then, it's just been the two of us and the housekeeper, Maria. She comes during the day, but she doesn't know sign language either." The front hall was bigger than my entire living room used to be. A massive chandelier hung overhead, probably worth more than my old car. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floors as Connor ran ahead, turning back to sign excitedly for me to follow. "He wants to show you something," I interpreted for Derek, who was watching his son with a mix of love and aching regret. "I wish I knew what was going on in his head most of the time," Derek admitted. "I talk to him, but I never know if he really gets it. And when he tries to tell me something..." He lifted his shoulders helplessly. "I just smile and nod and hope I'm saying the right thing, but I know I'm missing so much." We followed Connor up a sweeping staircase to the second floor. His bedroom was at the end of a long hallway, and when he flung the door open, I immediately understood why he'd been so eager to bring me there. Every wall was covered in drawings, not random doodles, but detailed, intentional art that told stories. There were pictures of Connor with a woman who had kind, gentle eyes. I knew at once she had to be his mother. There were pictures of him with Derek too, though in many of them Derek was turned away or staring down at a phone. And scattered through it all were illustrations of hands, hands forming signs, hands reaching out, hands almost touching but never quite connecting. "Connor, these are amazing," I signed, stepping closer to look. "You're very talented." He lit up with pride, then pointed to a drawing near his bed. It showed a train station, but not as we had seen it that morning. In this version, the people on the platform were signing to one another, smiling, engaged, connected. "Is this what you were thinking about at the station today?" I asked gently. Connor nodded, then signed, "I was thinking what it would be like if everyone could understand each other, if I wasn't always alone with my thoughts." I translated his words for Derek, who had been following our exchange with growing emotion. "God, Marianne," Derek whispered, running a hand through his hair. "I had no idea. I thought he was handling everything okay. He never..." He swallowed hard. "How did I miss this? What kind of father does that make me?" Connor was studying his father's face, picking up on his distress even without catching all the words. He stepped closer and tugged Derek's sleeve, then signed something quickly. "He wants to know why you look sad," I said. "He says he doesn't want you to be upset because of him." Derek dropped down so he was eye level with his son, taking Connor's hands gently in his. "Connor, I'm not upset with you," he said slowly, carefully. "I'm upset with myself for not learning how to talk to you properly. But that's going to change, okay? Starting tomorrow, I'm going to find someone to teach me sign language." "Actually," I said before I could talk myself out of it, "I could teach you, if you'd like." Derek looked up at me, hope and relief written all over his face. "You'd do that?" "It would give me something useful to focus on while I figure out what comes next," I said. "And Connor could help. Kids are often the best teachers. Connor clapped his hands together and signed so fast I had to concentrate to keep up. He says that would make him the happiest boy in the world, I told Derek, feeling my own spirits lift at the sight of his joy. Derek stood, and for a moment the three of us just stood there in Connor's room, surrounded by drawings of longing and connection, all of us sensing that something important was shifting. "Let me show you to your room," Derek said. "Then we can sit down and talk about how this might work." The guest room he led me to was bigger than any bedroom I'd ever had. It had its own bathroom and a cozy sitting area by a set of windows overlooking the gardens outside. Derek placed my 2 trash bags carefully on the bed, and suddenly I became acutely aware of how little I owned, how out of place my battered belongings looked in such an elegant space. "Marianne," Derek said gently, "I want you to understand something. This isn't charity. If you're going to help me learn how to communicate with my son, that's work. Real, valuable work. I'd like to pay you for your time." I shook my head immediately. "Oh no, Derek, I couldn't. You're already giving me a place to stay." "And you're giving me my relationship with my son back," he replied, his voice intense. "Do you know how priceless that is? I've been failing him for 2 years. Watching him pull further and further away and not knowing what to do. In a single afternoon, you've shown me more about who he is than I've managed to learn in months." "But I don't have any qualifications," I protested. "No degrees, no official training." "You have something better," he said firmly. "You actually see him, really see him, and you know what it feels like to be invisible to your own family." Those last words hit me right in the chest, not because they were unkind, but because they were painfully true. "I'm sorry," Derek added quickly. "That was too personal. I didn't mean to overstep." "No," I said quietly. "You're right. I do know that feeling." I sank into the chair by the window, every part of me suddenly tired. Yesterday, my son couldn't push me out the door fast enough. His fiancée called me an embarrassment, and he didn't argue with her. "Their loss," Derek said without hesitation. "Honestly, Marianne, in one day you've shown more empathy and wisdom than most people manage in a lifetime. If your son can't recognize your worth, that says everything about him and nothing about you." I looked out at the gardens, trying to make sense of how drastically my life had twisted in such a short time. Just 24 hours earlier, I'd been a woman with a modest home, a daily routine, and a quiet place in the world, however small it was. Now I was sitting in a mansion, being offered a job by a man I'd met at a train station, planning to teach him and his son how to truly talk to one another. "Can I ask you something?" I said, turning back toward Derek. "Of course," he replied. "What do you do for a living?" I asked. "I mean, this house, this lifestyle." I motioned around the room, a little overwhelmed. Derek gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I work in tech," he said. "Software development, business applications mostly. I started my own company about 15 years ago, and we've been lucky, I guess. Very successful." "Lucky," I echoed. Somehow I doubt luck had much to do with it. He huffed a quiet laugh. "You're right. It's been a lot of work. Too much work, if I'm being honest. Especially since Eleanor died." His voice softened. I buried myself in the company because it was easier than facing the grief. I told myself I was securing Connor's future, but really, I was running from the present. "What happened to Eleanor?" I asked gently. "Cancer," he said. "Aggressive. From diagnosis to the end. It was only 4 months." Derek sank into the chair across from me, suddenly looking years older. Connor was 8. He'd already lost some of his hearing from a childhood illness, but Eleanor was the one who learned sign language with him. She made sure he always felt understood, included. When she died, I didn't know how to take over that role. "So you both lost her," I said quietly. "Just in different ways." "Exactly." He let out a breath. "And instead of grieving together, we each shut down. I worked longer hours, took more trips, chased more deals. Connor spent more and more time alone, drawing, creating those incredible pictures I was too busy to really notice." His voice was thick with regret. "I kept hiring nannies, tutors, therapists, trying to pay other people to give him what I didn't know how to give. What he needed all along was his dad." "You're here now," I pointed out. "That's what counts." "Is it, though?" he asked quietly. Today at the station, I almost lost him because I was on a conference call about a merger that, honestly, means nothing in the grand scheme of things. I told him to stay near the information desk while I took the call. When I finished, he was gone. Those 15 minutes, he swallowed. I don't ever want to feel that again. I thought of Connor sitting on that edge, considering the unthinkable, and my chest tightened. "I think I can imagine," I said softly. "And then I found the two of you actually talking," Derek went on. "Really talking. And it hit me. I haven't had a real conversation with my son in 2 years, not since Eleanor died." He looked at me with a fierce intensity that made me almost want to look away. "So, when I say this isn't charity, I mean it. You're offering me a chance to rebuild my relationship with my son. You can't put a price on that." A knock on the door broke the moment. Connor peeked in, then slipped inside when Derek waved him over. He went straight to me and began signing excitedly. "He wants to know if you're staying for dinner," I said. "He says Maria is making spaghetti, and he wants to tell you about his school." Derek's whole face lit up. "He wants to tell you about school. He never talks about school. I ask him every day how it went, and he just shrugs." "Maybe he's been wanting to tell you too," I suggested gently. "He just doesn't know how to make himself understood yet." Connor kept signing, his hands moving faster as his excitement grew. "Now he's asking if we can all eat together," I translated, smiling. "And if I'll teach both of you some sign tonight. He says he has so many things to tell you, things he's never been able to say before." Derek's eyes shone with tears. "Tell him yes," he said. "Tell him I've been waiting a very long time to hear all of it." I conveyed the message, and Connor threw his arms around his father. Derek hugged him tightly, and over the boy's shoulder he mouthed, "Thank you to me." For the first time in years, something inside me settled into place. I felt right, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Later, at dinner, Connor became Derek's first sign language teacher. We started with basic words. Hello, thank you, love, and Derek tackled each sign with the focus of someone learning a foreign language, which, in many ways, he was. Connor was patient but animated, gently correcting his father's hand shapes and repeating signs until Derek got them right. For the first time since I'd met them, I could see the true resemblance between them, not just in their dark eyes and matching expressions, but in their determination, intensity, and deep capacity for love. "This is harder than it looks," Derek said, fumbling his way through the sign for understand. Connor giggled, actually giggled, and signed something to me, grinning. "He says you're doing well for a beginner," I told Derek, amused, "but your fingers are too stiff. He wants you to relax your hands." Derek laughed. "My son is critiquing my signing technique. I never thought I'd be so happy to be corrected by a 10-year-old. Throughout the evening, I watched them slowly begin to reconnect. It wasn't some instant miracle. There were still moments of frustration and confusion, hands hesitating in midair, signs misunderstood or forgotten. But there was also warmth, shared jokes, and the kind of stubborn patience that real love demands. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt genuinely useful. Not as a source of money, not as someone who fixed problems from the sidelines, but as a person whose presence truly mattered. That night, sinking into the soft guest bed, my thoughts drifted to Paul and Salem as they fussed over their engagement party. They were probably relieved I wasn't there. No embarrassing mother to hide, no complication to their polished image. They had no idea that by shutting me out, they'd pushed me toward something far more precious than anything they could offer. I had found a place where I was wanted for who I am, not what I owned. A place where what I knew and what I'd lived through actually meant something. The next morning, I would wake up with a purpose again, with work that mattered, with people who saw my value. Sometimes, I realized, being discarded is just the first step toward finding where you truly belong. 3 weeks into my new life with Derek and Connor, I had almost forgotten what it was like to glance at my phone with a knot of dread in my stomach. Almost. The day began, as so many had since I'd moved into the Morrison house. Connor woke me by knocking on my bedroom door, a habit Derek was trying to gently discourage, but one I secretly cherished. He'd stand in the hallway in his pajamas, peer through the cracked door, and sign, "Good morning, Grandma Marianne. Grandma Marianne." He'd started calling me that in the second week. When I asked him why, he signed, "Because you take care of us like grandmas do in movies, and you understand me the way family is supposed to." When I translated that for Derek, his throat tightened, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom so I could cry in private. That morning was a Saturday, which meant Derek didn't have to rush off to the office and we could devote more time to his sign language lessons. He was progressing quickly, driven by a kind of determination I'd rarely seen. Every night after Connor went to bed, Derek sat in the study practicing with the vocabulary cards I'd made. Every morning, he greeted his son with a few new signs he'd memorized. "Watch this," Derek whispered as Connor padded into the kitchen for breakfast. He signed, "Good morning, Connor. Did you sleep well?" Connor's whole face lit up. Derek's signing was still a bit slow and stiff, but it was clear, correct, and understandable. Connor signed back eagerly, and for the first time, Derek caught every word without glancing at me. "He says he had good dreams about the three of us going to the zoo next weekend," Derek said proudly, then looked to me to make sure he'd gotten it right. "Perfect translation," I confirmed, warmth spreading through my chest for both of them. These little moments had become the brightest parts of my days, watching Derek and Connor rebuild their bond, seeing Connor grow more animated and self-assured as his father learned to truly communicate with him, feeling useful in a way I never had before. It was mending something inside me I hadn't even realized was broken. Derek insisted on paying me $500 a week for Connor's tutoring and for the sign language lessons, plus room and board. It was more money than I'd ever earned in my life. When I told him it was far too much, he just shook his head and said, "You can't put a price on getting your family back." I was at the kitchen table that afternoon, helping Connor with his homework, when my phone rang. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Paul. I stared at the screen while it buzzed, torn between answering and letting it ring out. Derek, who was reading on the far side of the room, looked up and noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. "It's my son," I said, my voice coming out tight. Derek glanced at Connor, who was bent over his math workbook, then back at me. "Do you want to take it? We can give you some privacy." I shook my head and let it go to voicemail. Still, as I tried to refocus on Connor's homework, a cold, creeping anxiety slithered up my spine. 5 minutes later, the phone rang again, then again. By the fourth call, Derek's brow had furrowed. "Marianne, maybe you should answer," he said. "He's not giving up." With shaking fingers, I finally accepted the call. "Hello, Paul?" "Mom, finally. I've been trying to reach you for hours." Hours. He'd called 4 times in 20 minutes, but to him that counted as hours. "What do you want, Paul?" I asked. "What do I want?" "Mom, I'm worried about you. We're worried about you." His tone had that careful, measured quality that made my skin prickle. "Salem and I have been talking, and we realized we may have been too hasty the other night. You were in shock from the tornado. We were overwhelmed with the engagement party. We should have been more understanding." I closed my eyes, aware of Derek watching me with quiet concern. This version of Paul didn't sound like the man from 3 weeks ago. This one sounded rehearsed. "I'm fine, Paul. I've found somewhere to stay." "Well, that's actually why I'm calling," he said quickly. "Salem's parents had to cancel their trip. Her dad's company is going through some merger or whatever. Anyway, the party's postponed, so there's no reason you can't come stay with us now. Salem feels awful about how things ended." Salem feels terrible. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about any of it. "That's very kind," I said evenly. "But like I said, I'm settled where I am." "Mom, be reasonable. You can't just be staying anywhere." His voice sharpened slightly. I know the insurance situation is messy and you don't have a lot of resources. Salem and I talked and we want to help. Family should stick together. Family should stick together. Where had that philosophy been when I stood on his porch with my life in 2 trash bags? Paul, I do appreciate the offer, but I'm fine where I am. Where are you exactly, Mom? He demanded. You're being very mysterious. Are you at one of those extended stay motels? Those places aren't safe for a woman your age. Connor glanced up from his homework, sensing the tension. I gave him what I hoped was a calming smile and stepped into the adjoining living room to speak more privately. I'm staying with a family, I said. I'm helping them, and they're helping me. A family? What family? Paul pressed. Mom, you don't just move in with strangers. That's not safe. What do you even know about these people? The irony was almost suffocating. My own son lecturing me about trusting strangers, when strangers had shown me more kindness in 3 weeks than he had in years. They're good people, Paul. Better than... I stopped myself before I finished the thought. Better than what? Better than your own family? His tone was edging back toward the familiar sharpness. Mom, this is insane. You're 64. You can't just run off and play house with random people. I'm not playing house, I said, my patience thinning. I'm working. I have a job. A job? Doing what? He scoffed. And don't tell me you're cleaning or something. You're too old for that kind of work. Anger flared in my chest. I'm teaching sign language, if you must know, and I am not too old for anything I choose to do. There was a pause on the line. Sign language? He repeated. Who on earth needs sign language? A father who wants to communicate with his deaf son, I shot back, my words sharper than I intended. Silence, a longer pause this time. Mom, this all sounds unusual, he said finally. Are you sure these people are legitimate? I mean, who just brings a random woman into their house to teach sign language? Someone who values what I have to offer, I replied quietly. Look, Paul said, switching back into his reasonable voice. I think you need to come home. Salem and I can drive up and get you this afternoon. We'll help you figure out the insurance, make a plan to rebuild. You don't need to be dependent on strangers. I'm not dependent on them, Paul, I said. I'm contributing. I'm valued, I caught myself, realizing I was revealing too much. You're valued? Paul repeated, his tone shifting into something cold and calculating. Mom, what exactly is this arrangement? Are these people paying you? I should have dodged the question. I should have lied, or at least kept it vague. But I was tired of pretending I didn't matter, tired of acting like my work was nothing. Yes, Paul, I said. They pay me. Because what I do has value. There was a long stretch of silence, so long I wondered if the call had dropped. How much? He finally asked. That's none of your business. How much, Mom? His tone made my skin prickle. This wasn't concern for my safety. This was something else. Paul, I have to go. Connor needs help with his homework. Connor, he repeated slowly. The kid's name is Connor. Mom, listen to me very carefully. I want you to give me the address where you're staying. Salem and I are driving up to get you. No. What do you mean, no? I mean no, Paul. I'm not giving you the address, and I'm not leaving. I'm happy here. Mom, you're not thinking clearly, he snapped. The trauma from the tornado, being homeless, it's messing with your judgment. You can't just move in with strangers. And I hung up. My hands shook as I set the phone down. From the doorway, I could see Derek watching me, worry etched across his face, while Connor hunched over his math worksheet, blissfully unaware of the storm on the other side of the wall. Derek stood and walked over. That didn't sound pleasant. My son wants me to come live with him, I said. Now. 3 weeks after he wouldn't even let me sleep on his couch. What changed? Derek asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. I mentioned that you pay me for what I do here. Derek's expression darkened. Ah, so now that there's money involved, suddenly you're part of the family again. I should have expected it, I sighed. Paul's always had a strong interest in financial matters, but I thought, I shook my head. I thought almost losing me in the tornado might have shown him that money isn't everything. It didn't. If anything, it seems to have made him more interested in controlling whatever I have left. Connor appeared in the doorway, signing, "Are you okay, Grandma Marianne? You look upset." I forced a smile and signed back, "I'm all right, sweetheart." "A tough phone call with your son?" Connor signed, his brows knitting. Derek had told him a simplified version of my story. I nodded. Connor thought for a moment, then signed slowly. "Maybe he doesn't understand you either, like my daddy used to not understand me. Maybe he needs to learn better listening, out of the mouths of babes." I glanced at Derek, who had followed enough of Connor's signing to catch the meaning. "Connor might be onto something," he said quietly. "But some people don't want to learn to listen. Some people only hear what benefits them." My phone buzzed again. A text from Paul. "Mom, I'm driving up there tomorrow. I need the address." I showed the message to Derek. His jaw tightened. "Are you worried?" he asked. I thought about it. 3 weeks ago, the idea of Paul being angry with me would have sent me into a panic, desperate to fix things. Now? "No," I said slowly, surprised to find it was true. "I'm not worried. I'm angry." Derek arched an eyebrow. "Angry?" "I'm angry that he ignored me when I needed help, but now that he suspects there's money involved, he thinks he can swoop in and take charge. I'm angry he assumes I'm too incompetent to make my own choices, and I'm furious that he's trying to disrupt the first real happiness I've had in years just because it doesn't fit into his plans." "So what do you want to do?" Derek asked. I looked at Connor, who was watching us with sharp, perceptive eyes, feeling the emotional tension even when he couldn't follow every word. This little boy who had trusted me instantly, Derek, who had opened his home to me and treated me like family from the moment we met. "I want to protect what we've built here," I said. "Paul can disapprove all he wants, but he doesn't get to destroy this." Derek nodded. "Then we'll protect it together." The next morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, Paul's car rolled up the driveway. I watched from the window as he and Salem climbed out, both of them staring at the mansion with expressions I knew too well: appraisal, calculation, greed. Salem wore a designer outfit that probably cost more than some people's rent, not a hair out of place, makeup flawless despite the 2-hour drive. Paul was in casual weekend clothes, khakis and a polo, but everything about him still radiated money and self-importance. They both had the look of people who were used to being deferred to. Derek came to stand beside me, Connor on his other side. "Those are your son and his fiancée?" he asked. "That's them," I said. "They look like they're evaluating the property for purchase," Derek observed dryly. Connor watched them as well, then signed something that made Derek's mouth twist into a grim smile. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said they look like the mean people in movies," Derek replied, "the ones who try to take things away from the good people." Sometimes children see the truth more clearly than anyone. The doorbell rang and my stomach clenched. Derek rested a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Remember," he said softly, "this is your home now. You don't owe them anything." I nodded and went to the door, with Derek and Connor flanking me like quiet bodyguards. When I opened it, Paul's practiced smile faltered just slightly at the sight of me standing there between Derek and Connor, clearly comfortable, clearly belonging. "Mom," he said in a falsely warm voice, "you look good, rested." "Hello, Paul." "Salem." Salem's eyes were already wandering past me, taking in the entryway, the staircase, the artwork, mentally tallying up square footage and market value. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Paul asked, his smile tightening. I glanced at Derek, who gave a small nod. "Of course," I said. "This is Derek Morrison and his son Connor. Derek, Connor, this is my son Paul and his fiancée Salem." Derek stepped forward, extending his hand with calm courtesy. "Nice to meet you. Your mother has told us a lot about you." Paul shook his hand, but his eyes were hard, assessing, already trying to figure out exactly what kind of man Derek was, and what all of this might be worth. "I'm valued. I caught myself, realizing I was saying too much. "You're valued?" Paul repeated, his voice taking on a strange, calculating edge. "Mom, what exactly is this arrangement? Are these people paying you?" I should have sidestepped the question. I should have lied, but I was tired of shrinking myself, tired of pretending what I did didn't matter. "Yes, Paul," I said, "they pay me, because my work has value." The silence that followed was so long I glanced at my phone to see if the call had dropped. "How much?" he asked at last. "That's none of your concern." "How much, Mom?" There was something in his tone that made my skin crawl. This wasn't worry. This was calculation. "Paul, I need to go. Connor needs help with his homework." "Connor," he repeated slowly. "So the kid's name is Connor. Mom, listen to me very carefully. I want you to give me the address where you're staying. Salem and I are coming to get you." "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean no, Paul. I'm not giving you the address and I'm not leaving. I'm happy here." "Mom, you're not thinking straight," he snapped. "The tornado, being homeless, it's messed with your judgment. You can't just move in with strangers." I ended the call. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. Through the doorway, I could see Derek watching me from the study, concern etched across his face, while Connor stayed focused on his math at the table, unaware of the emotional storm swirling around him. Derek came into the room. That didn't sound like a pleasant conversation. "My son wants me to move in with him," I said. "Now, 3 weeks after he wouldn't even let me sleep on his couch." "What changed?" Derek asked, though I could hear in his voice that he already had a good guess. "I mentioned that you pay me for my work here." Derek's expression hardened. "Ah, so now that there's money in the picture, suddenly you're family again." "I should have expected it," I sighed. "Paul has always been motivated by financial considerations, but I thought—" I shook my head. "I thought almost losing me might have taught him that money isn't everything. It didn't. If anything, it seems to have made him more interested in controlling what little I have." Connor appeared in the doorway, watching me with worried eyes. He signed, "Are you okay, Grandma Marianne?" "You look upset." I forced a smile and signed back, "I'm okay, sweetheart." "A hard phone call with your son?" he signed. Derek had told him the broad strokes of my story, softened for his age. I nodded. Connor thought for a moment, then signed slowly. "Maybe he doesn't understand you either. Like my daddy didn't understand me before. Maybe he needs to learn better listening, out of the mouths of children." I glanced at Derek, who had followed enough of the exchange to get the idea. "Connor may be right," he said gently. "But some people don't want to listen better. Some people only hear what benefits them." My phone buzzed with another notification, a text from Paul. "Mom, I'm driving up there tomorrow. I need the address." I showed the message to Derek, his jaw clenched. "Are you worried?" he asked. I really thought about it. 3 weeks ago, the idea of Paul being angry with me would have sent me scrambling to smooth things over. Now, "No," I said, surprised by my own answer. "I'm not worried. I'm angry." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Angry?" "I'm angry that he ignored me when I was desperate, and now that he thinks there's money involved, he suddenly wants to rescue me. I'm angry that he assumes I can't make my own choices, and I'm angry that he's trying to tear apart the first real happiness I've found in years because it doesn't serve him." "So what do you want to do?" Derek asked. I looked at Connor, who was still near the doorway, reading our faces even if he couldn't catch every word. This child who had trusted me without hesitation. Derek, who had opened his home and treated me like family from the start. "I want to protect what we've built here," I said. "Paul can dislike it all he wants, but he doesn't get to destroy it." Derek nodded once. "Then we'll protect it. Together." The next morning, at exactly 10 o'clock, Paul's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from an upstairs window as he and Salem got out and looked around with expressions I recognized all too well. Appraisal, calculation, greed. Salem wore a high-end outfit that probably cost more than some people's monthly income. Her hair and makeup were flawless despite the long drive. Paul was in casual weekend clothes, khakis and a polo shirt, but everything about him still said money and importance. Their faces held the same look I'd seen when they assessed restaurants, neighborhoods, people. Is this good enough for us? What's it worth? Derek joined me by the window, with Connor on his other side. "Those are your son and his fiancée?" he asked. "That's them," I said. "They look like they're pricing out the place for a potential buy," Derek remarked dryly. Connor watched them too, then signed something that made Derek let out a short, humorless laugh. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said they look like the bad guys in movies," Derek answered, "the ones who try to take things away from the good people." He wasn't wrong. The doorbell rang and my stomach tightened. Derek rested a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Remember," he murmured, "this is your home now. You don't owe them anything." I nodded and went to answer the door, with Derek and Connor at my sides like quiet guardians. When I opened it, Paul's polished smile faltered just a fraction at the sight of me standing there between them, clearly comfortable and clearly not alone. "Mom," he said, forcing warmth into his voice, "you look good, rested." "Hello, Paul?" "Hello, Salem," I replied. Salem's eyes were already roaming past me, taking in the foyer, the staircase, the artwork, practically calculating numbers in her head. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Paul asked, his smile tightening. I glanced at Derek, who gave a small nod. "Of course," I said. "Come in. This is Derek Morrison and his son Connor. Derek, Connor, this is my son Paul and his fiancée Salem." Derek stepped forward, hand extended, courteous and calm. "Nice to meet you. Your mother has told us a great deal about you." Paul shook his hand, but his eyes were assessing, hard. "I wish I could say the same," he replied. "Mom's been very secretive about her arrangement here." "There's nothing secretive about it," Derek said mildly. "Your mother is teaching Connor and me sign language. She's an excellent teacher." Salem finally spoke, her voice sticky sweet. "That's so lovely. Marianne's always been good with kids, but surely this is just temporary, right? Just until she gets back on her feet after the tornado?" "That's up to your mother," Derek said, looking directly at me. "She's welcome here as long as she wants to stay." Paul's jaw tightened. "That's very generous, but family takes care of family. Mom belongs with us." Connor, who had been watching this back and forth with growing tension, suddenly stepped forward and started signing quickly. Paul frowned, annoyed. "What's he doing?" Paul demanded. "He's communicating," I said evenly. "In sign language, the language you wrote off as useless." "What did he say?" Salem asked, curiosity slipping through her polished expression. I looked at Connor, who gave me a little nod. "He said that family is supposed to make you feel safe and loved, not scared and unwanted," I translated. "He wants to know why you made me feel scared and unwanted when I needed help." The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. Paul's face flushed bright red. Salem looked genuinely stunned that a child would say something so blunt. "Now listen here," Paul began, but Derek raised a hand. "I think Connor raises an excellent point," Derek said calmly. "Your mother was in crisis. You turned her away. Now that you found out she has a stable, paid position here, you're suddenly very concerned about her well-being. I'm sure you can see why that might come across questionable." There it was, the truth, laid out plainly. Paul's face flickered through several emotions before settling on outraged defensiveness. "How dare you question my motives about my own mother? You don't know our family. You don't understand our situation." "I know your mother," Derek replied firmly. "I know she's kind, intelligent, capable, and generous. I know she saved my son's life, and that she's been helping us rebuild our family ever since. And I know she deserves better than to be treated like a burden when she needs help and an asset when she doesn't." Paul looked ready to explode, but Salem's hand on his arm stopped him. She'd been quietly studying the house while they talked, and I could almost see her recalculating her strategy. "Paul," she said carefully, "maybe we should respect Marianne's decision. If she's happy here—" But Paul wasn't ready to give in. "Mom, think about this logically," he insisted. "You don't really know these people. What happens when they don't need a sign language teacher anymore? When the novelty wears off? You'll have nowhere to go. Then I'll figure something out, I said calmly. The same way I've figured things out my whole life. But you don't have to, he protested. You have family. You have us. Connor signed something to me, and despite the tension, I had to bite back a smile. What did he say now? Paul snapped, bristling at being left out. He said real family doesn't wait until you're useful to want you around, I said. This time, Derek let out a short laugh he tried and failed to hide. Even Salem's mouth twitched. Paul's face went from red to almost purple. This is ridiculous. Mom, go pack your things. We're leaving. No, I said simply. What? No, Paul, I'm not leaving. You can't seriously be choosing these strangers over your own family, he said, stunned. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I had raised, sacrificed for, worried about, loved for 35 years, and something inside me finally let go. You're right, I said. I am choosing them over you, because they treat me like family. You treat me like a nuisance. Paul stared at me as if I'd slapped him. Salem watched us like she was following a tennis match. I think it's time for you to go, Derek said quietly. Paul opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. This isn't over, he spat. You're making a huge mistake, Mom. When this falls apart, don't expect to come crawling back to us. I won't, I said, and I meant every word. As they walked back to the car, Salem glanced at the house one more time. For a split second, I saw something like respect in her face. Paul slammed his door hard enough to shake the glass. We stood watching the car disappear down the drive. After a moment, Connor tugged on my sleeve and signed, "Are you sad they left?" I really considered it. I felt a lot of things. Relief, pride, freedom, even a flicker of fear. But sadness? No. No, sweetheart, I signed back. I'm not sad at all. Derek slid his arm around my shoulders in a purely familial gesture. Come on, he said softly. Let's go home. And we did. We went home. I should have known Paul wouldn't give up that easily. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later, when Derek's business attorney called the house instead of the office. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard Derek's voice drifting in from his study, tight, formal, edged in a way I'd never heard from him before. Connor was at the table working on a science project, building a model volcano we'd planned to erupt later that afternoon. He looked up, frowning, and signed, "Daddy sounds upset. Is someone in trouble?" "I don't know yet, sweetheart," I signed back, though my stomach had already knotted with a familiar sort of dread. 20 minutes later, Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face grim. "Marianne?" he said quietly. "Can we talk for a minute?" Connor looked between us, sharp and perceptive, sensing the tension. "Should I go to my room?" he signed. "Just for a few minutes," Derek signed back, his hands much smoother now after weeks of practice. "We'll finish your volcano when we're done talking." When Connor had gone upstairs, Derek sat heavily at the table. "That was my lawyer," he said. "Your son has filed a complaint with Adult Protective Services." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. "What kind of complaint?" I asked. "He's claiming I'm exploiting an elderly, vulnerable woman," Derek said slowly. "That you're not mentally capable of making decisions about your living situation or finances. He's requested a welfare check and a full investigation into us." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Can he even do that?" "Apparently, yes," Derek sighed. "The caseworker will be here tomorrow afternoon. Any report involving potential elder abuse or financial exploitation has to be investigated, no matter how flimsy it looks." Elder abuse. Exploitation. Hearing those words connected to my life felt unreal. 3 weeks ago, I'd been homeless and terrified. Now the people who had taken me in were being accused of victimizing me. "What does this actually mean?" I asked, bracing myself. Derek raked a hand through his hair. That gesture I'd learned meant he was stressed. "It means they'll interview us separately. They'll inspect your living conditions, ask about money, evaluate whether you're competent to make your own choices. If they decide there's exploitation, they could make you leave. Or worse, they could decide you need a conservator to handle your affairs." He met my eyes. Paul could petition to be appointed as your legal guardian. The room seemed to tilt. Paul, the same son who barred me from his couch, could end up in legal control of my life. The same person who saw me as an inconvenience or a potential asset, but never simply as his mother, could be given authority over where I lived, how I spent my money, even who I saw. Derek, I'm so sorry, I whispered. I never meant to drag you and Connor into this. Hey. His voice was firm as he reached across the table and covered my hand. You have nothing to apologize for. Paul is the one who should be ashamed. But what if they believe him? I asked. What if they decide I can't make my own decisions? Derek's grip tightened. Then we fight it. I have excellent lawyers. Connor and I will both testify about everything you've done here. But Marianne, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. My heart began to race. What is it? Are you staying here because you want to? He asked quietly, or because you feel like you don't have any other options? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, if money weren't part of the equation, if you could live anywhere, do anything, would you still choose to be here, with Connor and me? I realized with a slow kind of shock that no one had ever asked me that about anything important. Harold had assumed my yes to marriage was obvious. Paul had never asked if I wanted to move closer when I retired. Family and friends had always known best, making plans for me without really inviting my opinion. Yes, I said, without hesitation. Yes, Derek. I'd still choose to be here. These last 3 weeks have been the happiest I've been in years, maybe decades. Connor feels like the grandson I never thought I'd have. And you? I paused, searching for the right words. You and Connor have made me feel valued in a way I'd forgotten was possible. Relief softened Derek's features, the first real smile I'd seen from him since the phone call. Good, he said. Then we go into this with that truth, that you are a competent adult who chose to be here, in a mutual arrangement that benefits everyone. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. What if the caseworker believed Paul's story? What if she decided I was being pressured or manipulated? What if I lost not only this new life, but my freedom to decide anything about my own future? I must have been moving around more than I realized, because around midnight there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. When I opened it, Connor stood in the hallway in his pajamas, signing, "Can't sleep either." How did you know I wasn't sleeping? I signed back. Your room is under mine, he signed. I could hear you moving around. He hesitated, then added, I'm scared about tomorrow too. My heart squeezed. Oh, sweetheart, you don't have to be scared, I signed. This is grown-up stuff. It's not about you. Connor shook his head hard. It is about me, he signed. If they make you leave, I won't have anyone to talk to anymore. Daddy is getting better at signing, but you're the one who really understands me. I knelt so we were eye to eye and took his hands gently. Connor, listen to me very carefully. No matter what happens tomorrow, you will never be alone again. Your dad loves you and he's getting better every day at talking with you. And even if... I swallowed. Even if something happened and I couldn't live here anymore, I would still be in your life. I would still be your Grandma Marianne. Promise? He signed, tears welling up. I promise, I signed back. Some bonds can't be broken, not by paperwork, not by other people's decisions. He threw his arms around my neck, and I held him until his breathing slowed and he seemed calmer. After I tucked him back into bed and kissed his forehead, I made a silent promise of my own. I would not let Paul's manipulation shatter this little boy's sense of safety. Whatever it cost me, I would protect Connor and Derek from the fallout of my son's greed. The caseworker arrived the next afternoon at exactly 2. Her name was Janet Morrison. No relation, she clarified immediately with a brief smile. She was a woman somewhere in her 50s, with kind eyes and a steady, professional manner that didn't reveal what she was thinking. She wore a conservative pantsuit and carried a tablet and a thick file folder. Mrs. Holloway, she said as Derek led her into the living room. "I'm here to follow up on a complaint your son filed regarding your current living situation. I want you to know these investigations are routine, and my only concern is your safety and well-being." I nodded, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I understand. What would you like to know?" "Let's start with how you came to live here," she said. "Can you tell me about the circumstances that led to this arrangement?" So I did. I told her about the tornado, about going to Paul's house and being turned away, about the night in the train station, and about the little boy sitting on the edge of the tracks and the choice that had changed everything. I told her about meeting Connor and Derek, about how quickly I'd felt a connection with Connor and how obvious the communication barrier between them was. I tried to stick to the facts, but when I described that first night, homeless, rejected, and then suddenly sitting beside a boy on the edge of a train platform, some of the emotion slipped into my voice whether I wanted it to or not. Ms. Morrison took notes on her tablet, her face neutral. "And when Mr. Morrison offered you housing," she asked, "what were the terms?" "At first, it was just somewhere to stay while I figured out what to do next," I said. "But when we realized how badly Connor and Derek needed help with communication, it turned into something more formal." "Tell me about the financial aspect," she continued. "Your son is concerned you're being exploited financially." Derek started to answer, but Ms. Morrison raised a hand without looking at him. "I'll speak with you separately, Mr. Morrison. Right now I need to hear from Mrs. Holloway." I took a steadying breath. "Derek pays me $500 a week to tutor Connor and to teach both of them sign language," I said. "Plus room and board. It's very fair for the work I do." "And you feel this arrangement is equitable?" she asked. "You don't feel pressured or coerced in any way?" "Not at all," I replied. "If anything, Derek has been too generous. I offered to work just for room and board. He insisted on paying me because he believes my work has value." Ms. Morrison typed something into her tablet, then looked up again. "Mrs. Holloway, your son has suggested that the trauma of losing your home may have affected your judgment. How would you respond to that?" I felt a flicker of anger, but I kept my tone calm. "I'd say my judgment is clearer than it's been in years," I answered. "For the first time in a long time, I'm in a situation where I'm appreciated for what I contribute, not just tolerated out of obligation. The tornado didn't cloud my judgment, it sharpened it." She nodded slowly. "Can you tell me about your relationship with Connor? Your son expressed concern about an elderly woman being responsible for a young child." This time, I couldn't keep the emotion out of my voice. "Connor is an extraordinary little boy," I said. "He was struggling to communicate with his father, and I've been able to help bridge that gap. In return, he's given me joy and purpose I didn't even know I was missing. I'm not his parent. Derek is an excellent father. I'm more of a translator and a friend. A grandmother figure, I suppose." "And if this arrangement were to end," she asked, "how would you feel?" I met her gaze straight on. "It would break my heart," I said. "Not because of the money or security, but because I'd be losing my family." After she finished with me, Ms. Morrison spent about an hour alone with Derek, and then another 30 minutes with Connor. I waited in the kitchen, pacing, trying to calm my nerves by starting dinner, but my hands were shaking too much to be useful. At last, she came back into the living room where Derek and I were sitting. Connor had insisted on being there when she gave her conclusion, and was pressed right up against my side on the couch. "I've completed my initial assessment," Ms. Morrison said, glancing at her tablet. "Mrs. Holloway, I found no evidence of exploitation, coercion, or diminished capacity. You appear to be a competent adult who has made an informed decision about your living situation." The relief hit me so hard I almost felt faint. Derek reached over and squeezed my hand. "However," she went on, "your son has indicated that he may file additional complaints and could pursue legal guardianship proceedings. I want to make sure you understand your rights." "What rights?" I asked. "You have the right to choose where you live, who you live with, and how you spend your money," she said clearly. "As long as you are mentally competent, no one can force you to live somewhere you don't want to or stop you from living where you choose without significant legal justification." She handed me a business card. If you need legal help protecting those rights, this is the contact for our legal aid office. They specialize in elder rights cases." After she left, the three of us sat in the living room in a kind of exhausted quiet. Connor broke it first by signing, "Does this mean Grandma Marianne gets to stay?" For now, Derek signed back, but there might be more fights ahead. Connor thought this over, then signed with determination, "Then we'll fight them together." That's what families do. That evening, after Connor was in bed and the house had gone quiet, Derek and I sat on the back patio, the garden lights casting a soft glow over the lawn. He asked the question I'd known was coming. "What do you want to do, Marianne?" he said. "Paul isn't going to stop. He'll keep filing complaints, keep trying to force you to go with him. I can fight this, but it's going to be expensive, stressful, and it's going to drag Connor into the middle of it." I looked out at the garden. 3 weeks earlier, I would have folded. I would have decided that I wasn't worth the trouble, that avoiding conflict mattered more than what I really wanted. I would have gone back to Paul and told myself to be grateful for whatever scraps of tolerance I got. But 3 weeks ago, I didn't have Connor calling me Grandma Marianne. I didn't have Derek treating me as family. I didn't have work that mattered or a place that felt like home. "I want to fight," I said quietly. "Not because I'm stubborn and not because I want to punish Paul, though he's certainly hurt me enough. I want to fight because what we have here is worth defending. Connor needs stability, love, and people who understand him. You need support as a single father, and I exhaled. "I need to matter." Derek nodded slowly. "Then we fight," he said. "Together." The next morning brought a new kind of trouble, one I hadn't fully prepared myself for. Derek was in his study on a conference call when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a well-dressed woman in her 40s standing on the porch, holding an official-looking folder. "Mrs. Holloway?" she asked. "I'm Rebecca Chen, an attorney representing your son, Paul Holloway. I have some documents for you." Cold swept through me as I took the folder. Inside was a guardianship petition filed in county court. It stated that Paul was requesting to be appointed as my legal guardian due to diminished capacity and exploitation by unknown parties. "Mrs. Holloway," Rebecca said gently, "your son is concerned about your well-being. These proceedings are meant to protect you." I lifted my eyes from the documents, feeling something hard and bright settle inside my chest. "Ms. Chen," I said quietly, "I'd like you to give my son a message." "Of course," she replied. "Tell him that if he wants a war, he's got one." Her eyebrows ticked up a fraction. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm not sure you appreciate how serious these proceedings are." "Oh, I understand them perfectly," I said. "My son couldn't control me when I was homeless and desperate, so now he's trying to have me declared incapable so he can control me on paper. But I'm not the broken woman who stood on his doorstep 3 weeks ago, and I'm not going to roll over for him." I closed the door on Rebecca Chen's startled face and felt something I hadn't tasted in years, the fierce electric rush of deciding to stand my ground instead of simply enduring whatever came next. Paul wanted a fight. He was about to learn that some battles aren't worth starting. A year later, I was in the kitchen of what truly felt like my home, frosting a cake for Connor's birthday. 11 years old today, and he'd insisted on chocolate cake, vanilla icing, and enough candles to light up the whole house. Derek had run to the store for last-minute party supplies, and Connor was upstairs wrapping a present he'd made for me. He'd decided it should be a tradition that the birthday boy also gives a gift. His idea entirely. The legal war with Paul had been ugly, but mercifully short. Derek's lawyer, Margaret Williams, was a force of nature and an expert in elder rights cases. She shredded Paul's guardianship petition in record time. Adult Protective Services had already found no evidence that I was being exploited. When Paul's own attorney realized he was trying to gain control over a competent working woman who had chosen her living situation freely, she very politely recommended he walk away. He hasn't spoken to me since the hearing 8 months ago, when the judge not only denied his petition, but ordered him to pay my legal fees. Salem sent a short email afterward saying she'd never agreed with what Paul did and that she hoped I was happy. I deleted it without replying. Some bridges once burned are better left in ashes. But the real win wasn't in the courtroom. It was here, in the life we'd quietly built together. Connor was flourishing in ways that went far beyond just being able to talk more easily. Derek had become fluent in sign language, and watching the two of them now was like watching sun break through after a long storm. The boy who once felt so trapped and alone that he'd stood on the edge of a train platform, thinking the unthinkable, was now bright, inquisitive, and full of joy. I heard footsteps pounding down the stairs and turned just as Connor burst into the kitchen, his arms overflowing with wrapped packages. "These are for you, Grandma Marianne," he signed, his whole face glowing. "Sweetheart, it's your birthday," I signed back. "I'm the one who should be giving you gifts." "You already gave me the best one," he answered. "You gave me my daddy back, and you gave me a grandma who really understands me." The words hit me straight in the heart. I knelt and wrapped him in my arms. This kind, sensitive boy had healed something inside me I hadn't even realized was broken. Loving him, and being loved by him, had taught me the difference between being needed and being wanted, between obligation and choice. Derek came home just as I was adding the last touches to the cake, his arms full of bags from the party store. "The birthday boy is getting impatient," he announced, grinning at Connor. "He's asked me about 6 times if it's party time yet." "Almost," I said, stepping back to look at the cake. I'd decorated it with a little train, a quiet nod to where Connor and I first met, and circled it with 11 bright yellow candles. Derek set the bags down and came over, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "Marianne," he said, "before everyone arrives, there's something Connor and I wanted to talk to you about." My heart skipped. Had I done something wrong? Was the arrangement not working as well as I thought? Connor bounded over to us, signing excitedly, "Tell her, Daddy. Tell her about the surprise." Derek's serious face cracked into a smile. "Connor, you're supposed to let me talk first." "What surprise?" I asked, suddenly wary and curious all at once. Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "Connor and I have been talking about how much we love having you in our lives," he said slowly. "And we were wondering—" He hesitated, like a man about to step off a ledge. "We were wondering if you'd want to make it official." I stared at the envelope, confused. "I don't follow." Connor couldn't hold back any longer. His hands flew in a blur of signs. "We want to adopt you," he signed. Like how some kids get adopted into a new family, but the other way around. Daddy says there's a thing called adult adoption where you can choose your family even when you're grown up. I turned to Derek thinking I must have misunderstood. "Adult adoption?" He nodded, his cheeks a little pink. "It's a legal process," he explained. "Adults can formally adopt other adults into their family. Connor and I have been talking about it for months. You already are our family in every way that matters. We just hoped you might want it to be official." The envelope in his hand wasn't just paper, it was adoption paperwork. They wanted to adopt me. After an entire lifetime of feeling like an outsider in my own blood family, these two people wanted to choose me, formally, legally, permanently. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Connor stepped in close and took my hands. "Say yes, Grandma Marianne. Please say yes. I want everyone to know you're my real grandma, not just someone who lives with us." I looked at his earnest, hopeful face, then at Derek, who was watching me with that same hopeful anxiety. "You want me to be your family, officially? Forever?" I asked. "We want you to be our family the way you already are in our hearts," Derek said softly. "Connor would officially be your grandson. I'd officially be your son. You'd officially be our mother and grandmother. No one would ever have the right to question your place here again." The tears came then, hot, unstoppable. They weren't just offering me a roof or a paycheck or even protection. They were offering me something I'd never truly had before, a family that chose me, a family that wanted me, a family that saw me as irreplaceable. Yes, I managed to choke out between tears. "Oh yes, I would love that more than anything." Connor let out a whoop of pure joy and flung his arms around me, spinning me in the kitchen until we were both laughing and crying at once. Derek pulled us both into a hug, and for a moment we just stood there, wrapped up in each other, becoming on paper what we already were in our hearts. The doorbell rang then, Connor's friends arriving for the party, but before we answered it, Derek pressed the envelope into my hands. "The paperwork is already filled out," he said. "All we need is your signature and a court date. Margaret says it should be straightforward. The judge will probably approve it the same day." I held the envelope against my chest, almost overwhelmed by the weight of what it represented. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Because once we do this, you're stuck with me forever. No takebacks." Connor grinned and signed. "That's the whole point. No one can ever make you leave again." Derek's smile was gentle and certain. "Marianne, you saved my son's life and gave me back a real relationship with him. You've brought love and stability into this house. If we're stuck with you forever, we're the lucky ones." The party was a huge success. 8 of Connor's classmates came, including 2 other kids with hearing loss who'd become part of his inner circle. I watched from the kitchen as Derek moved back and forth between speech and sign without missing a beat, making sure every child was included in the games and conversations. But the moment that made my heart feel too big for my chest came when Connor stood up to make a little speech before blowing out his candles. His friends gathered around the table as he signed, and Derek voiced his words for those who needed it. "I want to thank everyone for coming to my birthday." Connor signed through Derek's voice, "but most of all, I want to thank my dad for learning to talk to me the right way, and my grandma for teaching him how." He turned and looked straight at me. "Last year, I thought I was going to be alone forever," he signed. "Then Grandma Marianne saved me at the train station, and she saved my dad too. Now we're a real family. So this isn't just my birthday, it's a celebration of our family." As Connor blew out his candles, I thought about that train platform. I'd gone there that morning believing my life was over, that I had nothing left to offer, no place in the world, no reason to keep going. I could never have imagined that the worst day of my life would lead to the best year I'd ever lived. Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Connor was tucked into bed with his new books, Derek and I sat out on the back patio like we often did, watching the stars prick the sky. "Any regrets?" Derek asked quietly. "About cutting ties with Paul? About choosing us instead of your biological family?" I really sat with the question. Was I sad about losing Paul? Yes, sad in the way you grieve something that used to matter, even when you know it's gone for a reason. But did I regret my choice? Not for a single moment. "I've learned something this year," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Family isn't about blood or guilt or obligation. It's about choice. It's about the people who recognize your worth and choose to keep you in their lives, not because they're stuck with you, but because they want you there." "Connor asked me something yesterday," Derek said. "I wasn't sure if it was too personal. He wanted to know if you were lonely before you came to live with us." I smiled, thinking of Connor's uncanny emotional radar, how he picks up on things most adults miss. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him I was very lonely, but also tell him that I didn't really understand how lonely I was until I wasn't lonely anymore. Sometimes you don't know what's missing until you finally find it." Derek nodded. "He'll like that. He's very protective of you, you know. Yesterday he told me that if anyone ever tries to hurt you again, he'll use his karate moves on them." I laughed, picturing him in his little white gi, fiercely defending me. "Well, in that case, I feel very safe." "Marianne," Derek said, his tone turning serious again, "I want you to understand that this adoption isn't just a symbolic gesture or a way to make you feel secure. Connor and I honestly cannot imagine our lives without you. You're not a guest here. You're not just an employee. You're our family." "I know," I said. And I truly did. For the first time since I could remember, I felt absolutely certain of my place in someone's life. "You're my family too." 2 months later, I stood in a courtroom for the second time that year, but this time my heart was light instead of terrified. Judge Patricia Henderson reviewed our petition with a warm smile, asking Derek and Connor a few standard questions. "And you, Mrs. Holloway," she said finally, turning to me, "are you willing to accept Derek Morrison as your legal son and Connor Morrison as your legal grandson?" "Your Honor," I replied, my voice steady and sure, "I can't think of anything I want more." "Then by the authority granted to me by this state," she said, "I hereby grant the petition for adult adoption. Mrs. Holloway, you are now legally Marianne Morrison, daughter of none, and mother to Derek Morrison, grandmother to Connor Morrison." Connor, who had been wonderfully patient up to that point, suddenly bounced up from his seat and signed, "Now it's official. Now it's forever." Judge Henderson laughed. "I take it this young man approves?" "He's been counting down the days," Derek said, grinning, as Connor practically vibrated with happiness. As we walked out of the courthouse, I was struck by how completely my life had turned around since that night at the train station 15 months before. Then, I had been Marianne Holloway, a woman with no home, no family who truly wanted her, and no sense of purpose. Now, I was Marianne Morrison, loved mother and grandmother, a cherished part of a family, and guardian of a little boy's happiness. That evening, we celebrated with a simple dinner at home, just the three of us, exactly as Connor had requested. He gave me a handmade card that read, "Welcome to the family, Grandma Marianne," in both English and sign, decorated with drawings of the three of us holding hands. "You know what I realized today?" Connor signed as we finished dessert. "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked. "The tornado that destroyed your old house brought you to us," he signed. "So maybe sometimes bad things happen so other good things can happen after." I looked at this wise little boy, this child who could find hope and meaning even in stories of devastation, and felt my heart fill to overflowing. "I think you're absolutely right," I told him. "Sometimes the worst storms carry us exactly where we're meant to go." Later, as I got ready for bed in the room that was truly mine, in a house where I was truly wanted, I thought briefly of Paul and Salem, probably arranging details for a wedding I hadn't been invited to. I sincerely hoped they were happy. But I was endlessly grateful that their rejection had pushed me to find my real family. Connor was right. Sometimes the worst storms don't just destroy, they deliver. And sometimes being thrown away is just the first step toward being chosen. I was exactly where I was meant to be, with the people who valued me most. I was home. And now, I'm curious about you, the one who stayed with me through my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever lived something similar? Been rejected, only to find something better on the other side? Tell me in the comments. And while you're here, I'm leaving 2 more of our most loved stories on the final screen, both of them full of twists you won't see coming. Thank you for watching until the end.